Many thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring this week's video. After shooting over 30,000 landscape photos over the past 15 months with the Nikon Z8, I've landed on a post-processing workflow that brings the absolute best out of every raw Nikon file. In this video, I'm going to walk you through my entire editing process and share the key adjustments that take my images from flat to finished. So if you've ever struggled to make your raw files pop without going overboard, this is exactly what I wish someone would have shown me when I first got started. So to jump right into it, this is an image from my recent Dolomites workshop. This is the raw file, and then we're gonna turn it into this right here. So this is the raw file straight out of camera. We're gonna take it to this right here. Hopefully I can replicate this again. But there's a lot of things that I really enjoy about this photograph right here. I love the clouds that are up here, this kind of cloud deck, and you can't see it really well right now, but we're gonna really bring that out. It's gonna be very obvious. I love the clouds interacting with the mountains here, and I really like this cloud kind of S-curve that's just mimicking the landscape right through here. So there's a lot going on in this photograph that I really enjoy, but as you look at this raw file, you can tell that it's a little flat, it's a little dull. There was a little bit of light kissing certain areas in this photograph, but it really just didn't come through here. Overall, I think the light is pretty flat here, but we're going to work and make this look much better, in my personal opinion. So the very first thing we're gonna do is come up here to the develop module. I always like to just balance the overall exposure first, because a lot of times when you're looking at a raw file, it's difficult to see what you're even working with. So I want to bring the palette up. I want to balance the palette to a certain point to where I can really see what I'm working with here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here to the basics section, and I am going to start with exposure right here. And I'm going to bring the exposure up just a tiny bit, nothing crazy. Let's add a little bit of contrast here, something to maybe about right there I think looks okay. Let's bring the highlights down a fair amount. I always like to swing these back and forth just so you can really see what they're doing. So maybe you're right around -70, I think looks pretty good. Let's bring the shadows up. And you'll see me do this throughout this entire video, where I like to swing these sliders far to the left, far to the right, because it's the easiest way for me to see what the overall impact is of a particular tool. So obviously I'm not gonna go +100 on the shadows, but maybe somewhere around there I think looks pretty good. The white point, let's bring that up a fair amount. I'm gonna hold down the option key just so I can see where those white tones start to bleed through. And it looks like somewhere right around here. So I'm gonna leave it at +29. The black point, I always like to bring my black point up. I don't like to bring it down because I think it just makes the dark tones too dark and adds too much contrast to the overall photograph. I like to kind of fade the black tones a little bit because it adds more of that kind of filmic look to it. It kind of softens the photo down. So I'm gonna take this to maybe right there. I always like to do -20 on clarity, +15 on texture, basically softening down the larger size details and enhancing the smaller size details in the scene. That adds to that kind of film style look, more painterly look, just to kind of soften the overall photograph just a little bit. I'm going to do a little bit of dehaze work here, so nothing like negative dehaze and nothing like that, but just a little bit, maybe around maybe +20 right there. I think that looks pretty good. And vibrance, I do want to reduce vibrance in this overall photograph because we're going to enhance the color in another section. And I am pretty certain that the colors are going to go a little bit overboard, so I want to go ahead and just reduce that right now. So this is where we started, and this is where we're at right now, before and after. So you can see it's not a massive difference. Let me just show you the settings that I use right here. 1/125th of a second at f11, ISO 100. This was shot with my 14-24, zoomed all the way in at 24 millimeters. So once again, this is where we're started, and this is where we're at right now. So what I like to do now that the overall exposure is balanced, so let's just close this down. Oh, real quick, one point. I want to go ahead and update my white balance here. You can see right now it's at 5950 and +19. If we hit auto, I always just like to hit auto just to see what it does. 7,000 and +15. I don't like that adjustment at all. So I'm gonna take the eyedropper here, and I'm gonna try and find something that is pretty neutral here, 18% gray, if you will. And you see those values at the bottom that are moving all over the place, the RGB. I always like to try and get those to somewhere close to 50, and that is usually a pretty good neutral area. Oh, here we go, 48, yeah, that's pretty close to 50. So we'll put that right there. And I think that's a little bit too warm for my liking, so I'm gonna back this off just a little bit to maybe about right there. And I want to add just a little bit of more magenta into the overall photograph. So I think that looks good there. So now I'm going to close down the basic section. So since the overall exposure is balanced, I feel now that I have a good working palette that I can easily see what's happening in this photograph. And now I want to go in and enhance color, which is probably one of my favorite aspects of photo editing. So what I'm going to do is I am going to start down here at the calibration section, which I absolutely love. And I always start at the bottom at the blue primary. Swing this back and forth just so you can see what's happening. It's crazy. We're sliding the blue primary saturation slider and it is impacting every other color out there. I made an entire video all about the power of the calibration section, which I'll link above here if you want to check that out. But this is a very powerful tool. So I'm going to take the blue primary to maybe around 45, I think looks pretty good. Do I want to do anything with the hue? Maybe bring it to the left just a little bit, just to kind of reduce the, I don't know, maybe just kind of tint these greens a little bit more towards yellow, just a little bit. Let's go over here to green primary saturation. I'm going to take this to maybe somewhere right in the mid-20s. And let's take this hue and let's bring that over to nothing like that. This photograph was captured in the summer and I want to make those greens look green, but not insanely green, not that toxic green. I want to make them look like appealing green. So I think that shifting this primary to somewhere right around here looks pretty good. And then the red primary saturation, swing this back and forth. I think we're going to put this somewhere around the mid-20s as well. And then let's take this hue and maybe just bring it over just a little bit to the left to maybe something like that. Let's toggle this entire section on and off. So this is before and after, before and after. And I think that really boosted the quality of the photo, the colors, the depth of the colors, but it did not go overboard, mainly because we had already reduced the vibrance globally. So I'm going to close down the calibration section. I now want to come over here to the color mixer section. And let's start with saturation first. So I definitely want to take the greens and just kind of bring them down just a little bit to about right there. I want to do something with the blues. I want to bring the blues down. As you can see, as I swing this back and forth, where a lot of those blue tones are contained. So maybe around -20, I think looks pretty good. And I think that's all that I really want to do with the saturation. Let's come over here to luminance. And if you're not familiar with what luminance is, it's basically the brightness value of a color, and it's a very powerful tool. It gives you the ability basically to dodge with color or burn with color. So it's really cool. So I'm going to come over here. Where do I want to start with luminance? I think I'm going to come over to the orange slider and let's kind of swing this back and forth, and you can see what that's doing right there. Let's bring that up to maybe around the mid-20 range. Let's do the same thing with the yellows. Maybe bring that to +22, 24, somewhere in that range. The greens, probably the same thing, right around the mid-20s, 25, 24. And the blues, let's actually bring the blues down. You can see what you can do to a sky. Like, look at that detail it's bringing out. So maybe right around there, I think looks good for there. Let's go over here to the hue section and orange. Maybe bring that down to about there. Do I want to do anything with the yellows? Maybe bring the yellows over just a touch. The greens, I want to bring the greens over. As you can see what that's doing. Bring just a little bit, maybe +15. And I think that is it. I don't want to do anything with the blues or magentas or anything like that. But let's toggle this entire section on and off just so you can see what we have done. This is before and after, before and after. I think that's, once again, very subtle, tastefully done. Let's toggle the entire edit on and off. This is raw and where we're at right now, raw and where we're at right now. So as you can see, we're really starting to emphasize a lot of this photograph and bring out a lot of drama, a lot of mood, enhance the colors, but I don't believe we're getting anywhere close to going overboard. Now I want to go ahead and crop this photograph. There's a couple small mistakes I made when composing this photo. It was a quick handheld shot and I was in a little bit of a rush. And I'll show you what I mean right here. For one, I cut off this rock here in the bottom left-hand corner, which for me is a major issue, but we are going to fix that. But I want to tighten up this composition. So I think what I'm going to do, let's unlock the padlock there. I want to bring this top crop down, but I don't want to cut off this part of the cloud. So I'm just going to bring it to about right there. And then I'm going to bring the bottom here to about right there. I think looks pretty good. And just basically tightening everything up just a little bit. So now what I want to do is let's go ahead and fix this area right here. And as you can see, there's a little bit of an observation deck. There's people standing right there. Let me just make sure, yeah. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the eraser tool here, and let's leave this on use generative AI and detect objects, and just make this circle a little bit smaller, and go ahead and select that and hit remove. Let's see how Lightroom does here. And it looks like it did a pretty good job. And let's come over here to this area, select that, and hit remove. Oops, get that little bit of corner there. Now let's hit remove. So let's go ahead and just turn this off right here. And as you can see, that did a pretty good job there, and it did a pretty good job right there. So might go back and enhance it just a little bit more, but overall, I think it looks pretty good. So now, my favorite part of photo editing, we're going to really enhance the light. We're going to use transitions of light to create depth in the overall photograph. We're going to enhance those areas where there's a tiny bit of light coming through, just to give this overall photograph more 3-dimension. So I'm going to start, let's just start with the sky. That kind of seems to be the most obvious thing. Let's just hit sky. It's going to do a fairly good job. It's good enough, but the sky adjustment I'm going to apply here is going to be pretty subtle. Nothing too drastic. Let's just bring the exposure down a little bit. Let's bring down the highlights just a little bit. Nothing too overdone. Just, I think that looks pretty good right there. And then I'm going to come over here and we're going to do a radial gradient. We're going to draw a big radius right across the center of this photograph to about right here. I want the feather at 100 because I want that transition on the edges to be very soft, very gradual, to create a very natural look. I'm going to bring this out just a little bit past the edges of the scene to about right here. And then let's bring this exposure up a fair amount to maybe about right here. Let's bring those highlights down just a little bit, and maybe even add a little bit of contrast. Let's add a little bit of texture to really kind of draw the viewer's eye into the center of the photograph, because that's ultimately where I always want the viewer's eye of my photographs to go into the center of the scene. And this is a great way to really draw them in. So I think that that looks pretty good right there. Maybe even kind of warm it up with a little bit of a color or the temperature, just a tiny bit to about right here. And we'll toggle this on and off so you can see what that has done. And I think that when you use a radial gradient in the center and bring up the exposure, and then you added a vignette and darkening the edges, that really creates that kind of tunneling effect to draw the viewer's eye into the center of the scene. So I'm gonna come down here to the effects section, and let's just add a vignette to this image here to about right there. And I think that that looks pretty good. I forgot to go down to lens corrections. I want to remove any kind of chromatic aberrations. I didn't see any, but I always like to just check that just in case. And let's come back up here to the mask section, and let's put that back on so you can really see what that has done. Now I want to darken the foreground just a little bit with a linear gradient, and I'm going to put it on an angle here. I'm going to drag it up to about right here. I'm going to drag this back just a touch because I ultimately just want to darken this area here. So let's bring this down a little bit to a point maybe about right there. I might adjust it further later, but I want to just darken that area because that's what I mean by, I mentioned earlier about light transitions. It's going to be a little bit darker, and it's going to go into a brighter area of the scene, and that just naturally creates depth. So I like the way that that looks right there. Now I want to do another linear gradient across the sky up here. And I'm just going to bring it down to about where those mountain peaks start. And I'm going to just reduce the exposure up here a fair amount. Maybe bring down those highlights a little bit as well. Maybe add a little bit of contrast as I toggle that on and off. I like to do that because it almost creates like a lid effect. It kind of holds the entire composition in place just by darkening the top. The bottom's dark, the center is bright. So it just kind of holds the whole scene together. It's kind of a weird way to explain it, but I do that often in photographs where the sky is at the top of the scene. And I think that that looks pretty good. Might be a little bit overdone, so let's just back that off just a touch right there. Now I want to go in and I want to find those areas, those little puddles of light, and I want to emphasize those just a little bit. So I'm going to come over here and let's go to radial gradient. This is probably the most impactful area right here. So I'm going to put it on an angle right through here, which is really going to play nicely with that area that we just darkened in the foreground. So I'm going to bring it to a point maybe right here, and let's just increase that exposure a little bit. I'm going to take this feather now to 75, and let's increase that exposure a little bit. Maybe bring that white point up a little bit right there. Let's just toggle this on and off. That might be a little bit overdone. Let's actually bring the whites down and reduce the highlights just a little bit to a point right there. Now I think that that's starting to look pretty good right there. Maybe just bring that exposure back just a little bit to there. Let's see what that has done. Very nice. Now there was a little bit of light hitting this area and a couple areas over here. So let's enhance those as well. Same technique, radial gradient. Let's put one right here, put it on an angle, draw it to about right there, make it a little bit smaller like that. And let's increase that exposure just a little bit to like that. Maybe increase that contrast just a little bit. Toggle that on and off so you can see what that has done. Let's come up here to this area here, radial gradient. Let's draw this one right over here. Bring it down, stretch it out a little bit like that. And let's increase that exposure some to about there. And then one more up here, radial gradient. This area here, it was really very, very little light hitting this area, but I do just want to bring out just a little bit of that. And let's just barely bring up the exposure just a touch to a point about right there. Now let's turn all of these masks on and off. So this is where it was with no masks, with the masks, no masks, with the mask. And I think you would agree that now the light is starting to look a little bit more three-dimensional. The overall image seems to have a little bit more depth to it, which is very, very important to me. I think that looks nice. I am going to come back here to this big radial gradient. I'm going to bring that exposure up a little bit. I also am going to bring the exposure back up over here just a little bit because this area of light is very, very important. And I like the way it plays with this area that we darkened here because it goes from dark to light and all the way into the scene, which I really, really enjoy. And I think that that is starting to look really nice right there. Now let's come over here and toggle the entire edit on and off. This is raw, and this is where we're at right now. This is raw and where we are at right now. And it looks totally, totally different. So I'm gonna come up here to the tone curve and I'm gonna lift these blacks a little bit just to kind of fade those a little bit more. And I'm gonna bring down the darker midtones a little bit and also bring up the brighter midtones a touch, adding a little bit of contrast while at the same time not adding too much contrast to those darker tones. I don't want those darker tones to get too dark, if you will. So I think that that is starting to look good there. Might come back up here to the basics section, add a little bit more contrast to the overall scene. And now I'm gonna come down to the detail section. I always like to take the sharpening to 100, the radius to 1.5, and take the detail to 75. But then take the masking, I'm gonna hold on the Option key, and I like to mask out almost all of this because I did bring up the sharpening pretty high. So I think just the areas right there in white is the only areas that's gonna get the sharpening. And I think that that looks pretty good right there. What was the ISO I used for this? ISO 100, so I'm not gonna do any kind of noise reduction with this photograph. And I think that that is looking really, really good right there. So once again, this is raw, this is where we're at right now. Raw, where we're at right now. I always like to kind of just look through here to see if there is anything that I missed. And you can see where the little eyeballs are. These are areas that I did impact or I did use these tools. Nothing in color grading, nothing in transform or lens blur. So I think overall, this is a pretty good starting point. This area is looking a little bit bright, so I'm gonna come back up here to that radial gradient and I wanna bring down those highlights just a little bit to a point right there. But from here, usually what I'll do is just kind of walk away for a day and revisit this photograph the next day. And then I'll always, give your mind time to rest, give your eyes time to rest from staring at the image. And you will always see things that you went overboard on, or maybe you wish you did differently, or you didn't apply enough of. And then you make some kind of, small little tweaks at that point. But overall, for the initial, 20-minute edit, I really like the way it's turning out. So once again, raw, straight out of camera. This is where we're at right now, adding the mask, adding light transitions, adding a little bit of depth to the overall photograph, and this looks really good. Now, before I do wrap things up here, I just want to say a huge thank you to the sponsor of this week's video, which is Squarespace, who I use for all of my website and e-commerce needs. Squarespace offers a stunning, user-friendly platform to build your website. With their Blueprint AI design system, you can showcase your photography and create a standout online presence with ease. Plus, built-in Squarespace SEO tools help your site appear in more searches, making it easier for the right customers to find you. And if you're looking to sell online, Squarespace's online store feature provides everything you need to sell your physical goods, digital content, or services seamlessly. So if you're looking to start a new website or possibly upgrade your current website, check out Squarespace squarespace.com/Mark Denney for a free trial and 10% off your first purchase. So if you have any questions about any of the editing workflow we went through right here, from taking it from raw to flat and boring to this right here, please leave those in the comment section below and I'll do my best to get back in touch with you as soon as humanly possible. And if you did enjoy this week's video, if you could give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed already. And as always, I really do appreciate you carving out a little bit of time to spend it with me here today. And I will see you all next Wednesday. Bye.